My name is Josh Harrington, and I am excited to get to do this today. I get to serve as the business development lead for Archetype Wealth Management, and that's a joy. But I've got to know both the guys that are on here today that are going to do the majority of the talking a lot over the last several years. And the hard part is going to be literally, I was thinking of this fly kept buzzing me. Like you get to sort of be, people get to sort of be a fly on the wall right now to hear the conversations that the three of us have all the time. And so I am excited to have both you guys here and excited that we get to talk about generosity. How do we help people to give more, to impact the world more, to have more of a kingdom impact, especially in this time period that we live in right now. So real quickly, let y'all introduce yourselves. I'll kick it over to Mike Sherrill. Mike is the CEO of C12 Group. Mike, I'll let you tell us briefly about C12 and your mission, and then also why you chose this month for C12 to focus on generosity.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, it's a joy to be with friends. So we exist to equip Christian CEOs and business owners to build great businesses for a greater purpose. So we operate peer advisory groups around the United States, South America, and Southeast Asia, focused on helping faith-driven leaders grow business and yet do it in a gospel-centric way. And we're passionate about seeing the gospel advance in the process of that. So we're always helping this intersection of how do we as leaders merge what you do in business, having an eternal impact in our companies, and then how do I live a life that's Jesus-centered and flourishing in the ways that God desires for us. And certainly you can't talk about stewardship without talking about money, though we think stewardship's a lot bigger than money, but that's part of it. And in November, we always in our groups, we talk about a business issue, a leadership issue, and some sort of ministry topic. And this month, we're actually looking at cash management on the business side. And we chose to look at ministry on this issue of strategic giving. And those two fit together, not because they both involve money, but actually because they're two areas that oftentimes we are not strategic. We tend to be caught up in just kind of giving by default, either giving by the ways we've always given and not being as diligent and strategic as we can be. And we feel like it's such a huge thing that drives to our identity and a chance to live a more adventuresome life when we step back and think about that the same way we think about sales strategy or marketing or product or any other part of our business. So we think they're kind of inseparably linked, and getting to work with thousands of leaders around the country, there's a lot at stake if we can figure out how to do that stuff well.
Excellent. Jeff, I'll kick it over to you. And if you sort of answer the same kind of thing, introduce yourself, introduce the Archetype Wealth Management team, what your mission is, and sort of why y'all focus on generosity the way you do and what that approach is like.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Good to be with you, Josh, and Mike. Thanks for being here, and all of you for joining in this call. This is one of our favorite topics at Archetype, and Archetype is a C12 company. It's a peer advisory group, as Mike said, and it's just, we joined it as a company we thought we needed the X and O's of how to scale. And of course, like most things, that has been helpful, but the relationships that we've developed from that have been really just a great joy in my life. So thank you to Mike and his whole team for really putting C12 together and the leadership he provides. It's really amazing. From the Archetype story, I could go on forever, as you know, Josh. I'll try to keep it short. Suffice it to say that our team spent 25 years plus at the biggest firms on Wall Street, the last stop being before Archetype started about 4 years ago. The last stop was Morgan Stanley for 17 years. And really in 2010, it was actually very simple. God gave us a vision. He literally just sort of gave me this clarity, and he wanted us to scale a business for his glory. And I remember saying to him, it was just one of those things where he gave me this message. I was with a mentor of mine who was in the industry and had grown a big business. And he said, basically, God said, scale what this guy started. And so I literally looked over my shoulders, and we were the only two people in the coffee shop. So I was pretty sure it was intended for. And the first response was, well, that sounds interesting. I got a lot of opinions about this business, but you got the wrong guy, because I've never scaled anything. And I remember God shooting back. That's why I picked you, so that you can't take any credit. So for the last 10 years, we've sort of accepted this challenge, and we just wake up every day and try to be obedient to that vision God gave us. And he just sort of reveals a little bit each day. And when I was thinking about, Josh, you sent us a few questions, and one of them was about, how do you think about generosity in this? One of our principles as a company is steward, not owner. And that might sound common language, let's say, especially to folks that are Christ followers. But you think about the implications of that. We deal with a lot of business owners in transition and this sort of thing. And the key, we think the real key to making transitions well and that sort of thing is asking the owner what he would want to do with the business. So if we're not the owners of our own businesses, and God is, and are trying to make a decision about giving or transition, whatever it is, ask the owner, what would he like you to give? What would he like me to give? And then respond accordingly. Whenever I ask God questions about what he cares about, he always cares about generosity. He's been so generous to us and to me. He gave his only son for us. So in response to that, if we ever ask him, what do you want us to do with the resources you've given us? If you ask God, there's always a component of generosity. The best way we can love him is by loving others, which just has to have generosity in it. So our business, we tend to have these business owners who think this way as clients. They think of themselves as stewards. And so they say, hey, they come to us, well, how much do you think we should give to charity? How much should we give to our kids? How much should we keep? All these things. And we always just say, ask the owner, and then let's work out the plan that God gives you. So our company isn't about facilitating generosity necessarily. It's about helping stewards steward their assets well. And again, if they're Christ followers, it almost always goes in a direction of philanthropic planning. So that's just something we feel like we have to be good at to serve the marketplace we're in.
Great. We're going to dive into some questions. I'm going to throw them out here and let y'all both just jump in on them. But for those of you who are participating and watching, along the way, if you have questions on anything that's said or just questions that are general questions or specific to your situation, feel free to drop those in the chat bar. And when we get to the end here, we'll dive into those. Could be really technical, could be very general kind of question, but we certainly want to help you out on that. So sort of the first question I had really for both of you to jump in on is, what do you see as a common obstacle or a common hurdle from people to increasing generosity? And I think both from a spiritual level and also from a practical level. And so, Mike, I'll throw it to you first as to what you see being the issues there.
I think there's a lot of spiritual obstacles. I think one of the most common, I was just in a forum a few weeks ago where this question was stated of how do you juggle giving to my church and giving all these great kingdom causes and these different charitable opportunities. How do you divide up the 10%? And some say, well, what do you mean the 10%? Well, if I'm going to give God 10%, how do you divide up what you give? And I think the fundamental flaw of the giving question is kind of how much to give, when the bigger question, back to Jeff's comment around stewardship, if really the stewardship is this total life paradigm that I am God's, everything is God's. There's really not like mine versus God's versus the world, like it's all his. The bigger question is, what am I going to keep? Like it's all his anyway. So it's not like God needs it, but he invites us to participate. So I think spiritually, it's the lie of possession. It's the lie that either God needs me. So I think if you are a really generous person, it can be easy to buy into this lie that you are a funder of the kingdom. And good news is God's loaded, and you are not his only hope. He's actually inviting you to experience the joy of participating in what he does through giving, not hoping you save the day, but not having stepped back and done some identity-based work on what am I going to keep? What's our finish line? What is going to be used for sustaining our family and this business or this lifestyle, and what's going to be sown into things. So I think spiritually, that's a big obstacle. And I think the reason the Bible talks so much about the love of money and the danger of greed is it's the old Rockefeller trap of, how much is enough? Well, just a little bit more. And so you can get sucked into this idea of one day I'll be generous once I have this laundry list of securities put aside. And so those are spiritual things. Practically, I think there's a lack of plans. I think we tend to give impulsively or emotionally or out of default or obligation. And so we don't think about it strategically and haven't seen it modeled. And so we just give the way we've always given. Maybe we've been given the same way since we came out of college, and our situation and capacity to give is actually a lot more elegant than our strategies for giving. And that's part of what I know I appreciate about you and Jeff, is helping people think way more strategically. I think we don't know what we don't know around tools, process, models, ways to even think about giving today. I have some friends who talk about the power of living a legacy versus leaving a legacy. And those are the things that I think when those light bulbs come on, then generosity becomes this fun game of, man, God, what do you want to do today? What are we going to get to do this next season? But I think spiritually and practically, those are a few big things. Jeff can make it sound way smarter.
It's interesting for me as someone who served as a pastor for more than 2 decades to actually think that maybe we talked about the 10% number too much, that it became a crutch. It became this box to check, and not even diving into. In the Old Testament, it was actually closer to 1/3 or more, and the New Testament's even more than that. So it's interesting to hear you say how that could become an obstacle. Jeff, sort of the same idea for you there. What are you seeing sort of more from the other side, the planning side, as really being the obstacles that you run into with people?
Well, as Mike was talking, I got this picture of myself. I visited a few C12 groups to talk about this curriculum this month, and I told them I'm like a money addict coming to speak to other people to help them with their perhaps money addiction. People who have an alcohol addiction or drug addiction or whatever it is, sometimes they're the best counselors, right? Or sponsors for other people that have had the same problem. They really understand what goes into it. I said, for a couple of decades of my life, I was putting money as a little g God before the big G God. And I wouldn't have told you that when that was happening, but it was revealed to me as I did Bible study, and God really got a hold of me and identified, and he just beat on me about being a steward, not an owner. I was behaving like an owner. And my generosity, if you could call it that, was commensurate with my control. And so like in church, even though I was going to church, remember those little charts in that stewardship campaign that was step up? Like, okay, you're giving 2%, give 3%. And we were just like working our way up that little chart. And then as God got a hold of me and he just revealed exactly what Mike said, which is he owns it all. And I saw models of how other people were like, well, how much, like Mike said, how much should I keep? And people doing like reverse tithes, living on 10%, giving 90. It blew my mind, but my heart was already kind of receptive to that. And so suddenly our generosity exploded. We got off the little chart because of God's principle soaking into my heart, not just my head. So I feel like I'm kind of in the money recovery business, and we're just one beggar showing another beggar where they got bread. And so I love that. And then from a practical standpoint, so you can't, I don't know how you get there. I don't know how you get to a very generous place without that spiritual conversion. And then from a practical standpoint, that's really the X's and O's. We tend to, we love it when we're able to be salt and light to people in our business. But generally, it's really the Holy Spirit's job to convict people around their spiritual beliefs and to follow Christ, this sort of thing. But we tend to come alongside people who have already had a lot of that conversion, and they need the practical tools. So you were talking about the spiritual and the practical. And so, we can get into some more of this, but I thought C12's curriculum this month did a great job of just illustrating some basic tools that can be used. And so let me just give you one statistic I'll throw out there that really shocked people in these groups. And Mike, maybe you can kind of pick this up and give an example in your group or other feedback you've heard this month. But one of those was, 80% of giving in America is done with cash. Okay. However, 90% of Americans' net worth is not cash. So kind of, Josh, to your point, we just keep doing things the way, or Mike was saying, we just kind of keep doing things the way we've been doing them. Most people maybe I saw my parents write a check every month and put it in the plate. So guess what? When I started giving, I wrote a check and put it in the plate. And so what most people don't realize is that I sort of shockingly to these C12 groups said, never write a check more than $100 charity, right? Because that's usually the donor advised fund limit on what you can give away. But there's these online bank accounts called donor advised fund. You can give appreciated stock. So if you've got some S&P 500 index ETFs or Amazon stock or whatever you've got, you can donate the appreciated stock, avoid the capital gain if you've held it for a year or more, get a deduction for the fair market value, and avoid the capital gain. So there's really a double deduction. So our IRS code is unbelievably generous about this. And I know we'll get into some more practical stuff, but let alone giving away a piece of real estate before you sell it, or a piece of your company before you sell it, or even an operating interest. We don't need to get into all that maybe in depth today. But I asked, and I told both of you guys this, but for the audience's benefit, so I was sat in front of 36 C12 members this past month, and I asked them at the end of this little presentation, just like we're talking about with you folks, how many have ever given anything other than cash? 4 out of 36, and mea culpa, 1 out of my group. So, thank you, Mike, for creating, and your team for creating a space for this conversation. I was looking at our calendar for the next couple of weeks. It's packed with people who want to go, what do I need to give? Be more efficient. So there are a lot of strategic things that can be done. And I know I'm getting a little granular, but Mike's right. Having kind of a strategic plan, like you do that for your business, doing that for your giving and your personal finances is also important. So let me stop there.
I've got a buddy and a C12 guy. He's actually speaking at the conference with you next spring, Jeff. But he just recently did sold his business, did an ESOP conversion, and what was exciting for him is he had not thought about the generosity side as strategically as he had the sales business side. And when those things became intertwined, and this is about $150 million transaction, the cool part was he went, man, I'm as excited about the multi-staged giving engine I've created that I get to now manage. That's actually more fun than the wealth stewardship and investing stuff. Like he's actually beginning to think about kingdom investing the same way he did a stock portfolio, and getting to do impact investing. And he's like, oh my, this is so much fun when you begin to get to think this way and realize there's just more opportunities and tools, and it kind of changes the whole way you even view the joy of seeing something appreciate and value. Is what is the new giving scenarios that will create. And so I think that whole arena is a lot more exciting than people realize.
There's so much literature and training and education out there on how we increase valuation that I think that comes a little more natural than there is that on how do you increase impact. And valuation actually opens the door for impact. But I love what you're talking about there, Mike, of how do you grow an impact. Jeff, as you were talking, I got to watch over a period of years, you and your family, as you went through some of this, God working on you. So one of the next questions I sort of had was, outside of being seen as being nice or a good person, how do you see becoming more generous have other impacts on your family or your organization, these other areas that generosity has an impact? And I have to watch that in your family a little bit, but I thought maybe have both of you share on what are the other areas that you see impact.
I think Mike was going there. It was kind of a perfect segue for this conversation about your impact, right? So this business owner that Mike was talking about, getting excited about this idea of generosity and what could he do with it. And I know we'll get into this hopefully in a minute. We'll talk about kind of the estate planning stuff. So if you're going to give away money when you're dead anyway, one of our jokes is that we don't think you get credit in heaven for giving stuff away when you're dead. And by the way, it's not that much fun. You're not here to give it. So, and that kind of speaks to Mike's long-term planning deal. If you've done enough planning to know kind of what your finish line is. There's 3 questions, right? What's your personal finish line for you and your wife or your family or your spouse? You need to identify that. How much is enough for the kids? And then what do you do with the rest? Those sound really simple, like those very simple questions, but we find that very few people have answered those questions. So we view that as a big part of our job, is just helping people identify how much is enough for us, how much is enough for the kids, and what do we do with the excess. And when you talk about family impact, Josh, the first thing that pops into my brain is a family that I grew up with. They were an older couple when I was a kid, and my dad was a pastor, and so they went to our church, and they were the most generous people I knew, right? At least that I knew of. Maybe there were more, but I always picture, and I tell people to picture the most generous people they knew. Like, this was it for me, the Whitmires, right? I can picture them. They always had sweet smiles on their faces. They were just a joy to be around. They had a great relationship with Christ. I mean, it was just as much time as I could be in their presence. I loved it. And they've passed away now. I went to their funeral and watched their kids speak, and just their kids had that same glow to them that their parents had. So there's just something about the way God made us. He's so generous, and we're to reflect his spirit. And I just think it's even physically available. And of course, the number one question we get from our clients is, how do I not ruin the kids? Okay, maybe they haven't answered their own, how much is enough for me, but they're very worried about how much is enough for the kids. And so having this generosity conversation, generosity, we say, is the antidote for materialism. So that's what everybody's worried about, is their kids are just going to take all the money that their family has generated and waste it. Okay, and it'll be a negative impact. It'll be a headwind, not a tailwind for their children. And so how do you make it a tailwind? It's gratitude, it's appreciation, it's generosity, all of those kind of things. So I just think of the people, I just have a kind of a picture, a movie running in my mind of what these families look like. And don't we all want a well-adjusted family that's grateful and generous? So Mike, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think there's a tremendous amount of joy and freedom it can introduce to a person, into a family, into a business. I think back to one of my first mentors in business who had sent a financial finish line and was giving the rest away. And the cool thing was, I remember him walking into a meeting where he was being kind of opposed by someone who was trying to stick it to him and said, hey, you're going to lose $1 million in this deal. And he said, listen, like, all you're doing is taking away my ability to give. Like, this is, you're affecting my ability to help widows and orphans and build that school. And he was free to view himself as a conduit of resources, not a cul-de-sac grabbing things. And so it was just a rising and ebbing, kind of an ebb and flow tide of, what do I get to give? God, how much of this will we get to be stewards of? We started our kids off when they started getting allowances. We gave them jars and they got money for their, spend money, save money. But the first thing they do is we started them out at 25% of you give. And so you tie 25% as their starting point, and then save 25 and spend 50. They don't know that that's strange. So we're just figuring, start them there and work up. But beginning to involve them in things, whether it's as simple as, hey, Christmas, hey, here's some money we're going to give. Let's, as a family, let's evaluate some options. How would we give? Who would we give? Why? Well, when your kids and spouse start looking at needs and opportunities, and missions are making a difference, or people in crisis. I just, Jeff, you talked about sharing your C12 group around the idea of non-liquid giving. I got an idea from my C12 group this month. Actually, one of the guys says for 15 years, every month him and his wife put money into a kingdom account. They literally have a separate debit card just to spontaneously help and bless somebody they come across need. So the family all carries that debit card. If they see someone at the grocery store, can't pay their bill, or they see someone at the restaurant who needs someone to cover their tab, they all kind of go, hey, who found an opportunity to use the kingdom account to bless somebody? Well, I love the idea of our kids and spouse even going, let's begin to look, and rather than feel like an ATM, we deal with entrepreneurs, a lot of high net worth people in a church setting, or it's giving season, and you can feel like an ATM. I don't know how many giving emails I've gotten last week from great nonprofits, but it can just seem endless. But if you flip that, instead of playing defense and just going, okay, what do I have left? Okay, I'll give you some, I'll give you some. You start playing offense. It makes you get excited about even going, hey, how do I go increase my capacity to participate in that? How do I see things as opportunities rather than demands? And so I think strategic generosity gives you freedom as a person. I think it gives your family joy, and it begins to fight against the message of the world's consumerism. It invites you to think about the way God sees things. And when you're having the conversations, like there's nothing more powerful than having your kids get to give the money you just gave them and then go, oh, this is probably what it's like when I'm giving, right? It's the same thing. So my little girl's like, hey, I gave $10. I'm like, well, you gave my $10 because you have nothing. I'm like, oh, that's right. I don't have anything either. And so I think the cycle of family giving, involving your family in it, actually is as much about God discipling me as it is about discipling them. So
those are some great examples of where I sort of wanted to go with the next question. Then we'll start diving into some of the practical stuff, which is inside of families. There's so much tension around money. It's crazy. It doesn't matter how much you have or how little you have. Your finances will either stress you or bless you. It's just going to happen. What are some resources either of you might throw out there for how do you engage in deeper conversations with your spouse, your children? Because so often finances are the thing that one person ends up taking on and controlling, and it's just never discussed. And it doesn't come out till much later when things are in a downward spiral pretty significantly. Are there any resources y'all would recommend for helping people start having those conversations?
I'll
go first. You or me, Jeff?
Yeah, I'll take it, Mike.
Okay.
And it's one of the resources C12 provided. But, for me, stories are always the best. I learn a lot from stories. I think it's easier to communicate with my family, for example, with stories, and even with clients with stories. I don't really do a great job being told what to do, but I love seeing other examples. And Mike was talking about this, like models of seeing other people do things inspires us. And so I think, just like he's talking about, even in a C12 group, just a little idea, that inspired him to think about doing something different. And so one of the stories that C12 highlighted this month was Alan Barnhart, right? Another C12 member in Memphis, and a friend of all of us. And I've had a great chance to spend a lot of time with Alan. We're working on a little book project together. And so when I think about involving your family, what I wrote down was Barnhart. And so I interviewed his son, one of his sons, Nathan, for the book. And it was really interesting what Nathan said. I said, hey, what'd you think about it when your parents basically gave away all the stock of the company? And, so it's an operating entity. For those that don't know, the crane and rigging company, they're all over the country. And, they were giving away sort of 50% of their profits for a long time, and then sort of papered, we call it papering the truth. They papered the fact that a foundation owns all of it. And so Alan and his wife pay themselves a salary, and then all the profits go to charity. And so I was asking Nathan, how does it feel like to have your parents give away the company, the ownership? And he said, well, I knew it was they were always behaving that way anyway. So it was just a financial transaction. It really wasn't something new. And the other person we're working on this book project was a guy named Jeff Rutt, who owns a home building business in Pennsylvania. Did a similar thing, really inspired by Alan. And I interviewed his son, and he told me the exact same thing. Well, that's the way they always behaved. I mean, they just papered it. So I just think, we know as parents that more gets caught than taught, as they say. And so I just think by living this life of generosity and including them and just in the daily bit of it, or as Mike did with the envelope, just them seeing what you do and taking them along for the ride to volunteer or go to church or do different things, help people with the debit cards, as Mike said, or whatever it is, just be yourself. I don't think you can you need to necessarily program it all. I think just behave that way. And it's amazing. We see these folks that maybe don't have a program to do it, but they behave that way. Their kids tend to follow in those footsteps.
I would add, if you want to do a self-study, I think the book God and Money by the guys at Generous Giving is a great set of family case studies. Randy Alcorn's work is all good. So there's a lot of self-study you can do, but the organization Generous Giving, if you go to generousgiving.org, again, you go to the media tab and they got video after video after video of families sharing their story, and they're not prescriptive. They're just descriptive. Some it was recovering money addiction. Some it was this ongoing journey. Some it would just seem natural. Some will say this was totally unnatural, but I think the stories are powerful. But my wife and I, a couple of years ago, went to a retreat they offer called a Journey of Generosity. You'll hear people talk about a jog. There's no running. There's just actually there's the opposite. There's lots of good food and living room time. Yeah. You can handle this jog. And what was so powerful to me is there's zero ask. In fact, at the end of it, just to give it a little preview, I was so moved. I asked, can I give to this? This is a great thing. I want to fund these. I said, we don't take money. Like, you can't give money. So it's not a ploy for like a development ask, but it literally was a guided time for my wife and I to process through a series of questions that we just hadn't asked ourselves or one another or processed. And there wasn't right, wrong answers for being given to us. There were really good questions being given to us about, why do you think God has given you these resources? What is the dreams He's placed in your heart? How have you seen? What are you afraid of? What are you hopeful for? All those things, as Jeff mentioned, these are simple questions, but most of us just don't stop and answer them all. And we will answer them differently, and that's okay. But I think things like a jog, going to gatherings of the people who are wrestling with stewardship. I remember in the book God and Money, the author recommended, who's the small group where you actually share your wealth and giving and spending goals with? Like, I doubt your small group, you're sitting around going, hey, what do you make? What do you keep? What do you give? What's your guardrails on excess or gluttony or whatever? I mean, like, it's a little personal, but who is that group? And when you can find people you're processing with, and then I think it is important that whoever you're talking about, your estate planning, your retirement planning, your insurance plans, all that kind of stuff, if you're not talking about your giving objective, your legacy objective today in the midst of those plans, it's a bit of the tail wagging the dog. So it has to be kind of baked into, when we set our budget for the next year, it's not to say what are the school needs and kid needs and health needs, but literally, what's going to be the radical generosity play? What would we have to change? Would we even change anything about our lifestyle to enable that giving plan, and letting your kids be part of that? That's kind of changes the game. And eventually, I think the dangerous thing about involving your kids, a few years ago, my wife did a Advent deal where every day we served somebody differently. I wrote checks. The girls made cookies or went to the hospital or wrote notes or went and served the homeless. They did something every day of Advent. And then Christmas morning happened. I woke up and I'm like, let's go open gifts. And the girl's like, what are we gonna do today, Dad? I'm like, well, we're gonna hang out as a family. We're gonna read the Bible story. But it's Christmas. It's about giving. You're gonna spend a day just being about you. Isn't it about helping other people? I was like, right. When you involve your kids in it, it then becomes kind of this self-perpetuating dynamic and conversation that, again, makes it about we get to give, not how much do I have to give, and even makes you start looking at, do we even need to keep as much as we are, because it'd be really cool to get to give that.
And it's such a great opportunity. I love this season of the year. You go from Thanksgiving straight into Advent, straight into Christmas, straight into New Year's. Like it's like God said, okay, here's this month and a half period of time where you're going to have to try to avoid these conversations because it's just all around us. And so we talk in our family and stuff a lot of times about doing things that are intentionally unintentional. In other words, as a parent, we have very much an intentional purpose. We may not be calendaring it out for our kids because I've got 3 boys who are all over the place. So it doesn't seem formalized, but you can be very intentional about these conversations without it seeming formalized to them. I want to shift to the sort of practical aspects that surround generosity a little bit. And just a reminder, if anyone has questions, feel free to drop those into the chat bar there, and we're going to get to those here in just a few minutes. And Mike, I wanted to start with you on this one because I think a lot of times when it comes to generosity, we can be drawn to the giving to nonprofits, 501c3s, the tax benefit purposes, and all of those things. And certainly we need to be just living generosity. Like the debit card thing is so great, right? There's no tax benefit. There's just you're doing the thing because you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to be generous and live generously. But when it comes to those areas where you're giving and there's tax implications and all of these things, do you have any suggestions on how someone might evaluate the effectiveness and the efficiency of the generosity that they're doing to organizations?
Yes. A bunch of thoughts. I'll share a few. One, if you're giving out of the business, so I want to separate a little bit here. You get giving personally and giving through the business. Again, part of what we talk about C12 is the idea of an integrated strategy for how you live out your faith in business. And part of that B, what's the company's mission, vision, core values. I think it's very important as a business you think about how to align the way you give the very mission and values of the company, and even codify that. That's a great way to help protect yourself against find yourself feeling pressured to maybe give to things you don't want to give to one day. I also think it's important to differentiate the giving you give because it's a passion of God in you and it's the right thing to do versus the giving we sometimes do for political reasons. Yeah, I know there's companies in my city that give to United Way or certain organizations because it's kind of the thing we do. But it may not be necessarily a gospel thing. It's a good thing, but it's not driven out of a identity place. So just think about differentiating that. But there's endless things, right? So how do you not give a little bit to all the things, but think about impact? And I think it's okay to wrestle through what are the unique areas of need, either in your city or the country or the world that you're in, and really ask God, what is he giving you a unique passion for? And while there are needs for foster care, orphans, wells, water, food poverty, Bible translation, building, all those things, you probably don't have enough money to move the needle on all of them. And so thinking through, are there some that God has given us connection to, a chance to do a relationship where we're going to do more than just give money? We're actually going to be able to invest into people and be part of a long-term vision play. And so I would encourage people to think about honing your giving in for greater in depth in endurative giving when you have an opportunity to. But then in terms of thinking through the measurement, I've long-term used the phrase kingdom ROI. I try to, at the end of the day, I'm a business guy. When I'm giving I was given to a Bible translation ministry years ago, and I was evaluating them before I did. I asked them, okay, what's your total operating budget? What's program budget versus admin? Okay, what's the ultimate end goal? And it was, well, to get the word of God to people. I'm like, okay, well, how many people did you get the word of God into the hands of last year? And so they pulled back, okay, it was X number of people reached with their ministry that year. And so then I backed and did a ratio of budget dollars to people reached. And that year was $1.87, that for $1.87 of overall budget, they reached someone with the word of God. And I went, man, that's a pretty darn good kingdom ROI. If I feel called to this space, $1.87 per person, I'll put a few of those tokens in. Let's do that all day long. But then I found others where it's a good idea, but it wasn't a good strategy. It wasn't sustainable, didn't have good systems. And the ratio of how much money was being consumed to the ministry impact being done was really poor. Good ministry cause, good end recipient, but really inefficient. And so in the same way, I wouldn't put my money in a low performing stock, and I wouldn't buy a business that's losing money. Why would I invest in a ministry that doesn't seem to have a good strategy? So I would encourage us to leverage the same scrutiny we put towards investments. And I view giving as an investment. It's just one where I'm not expecting a financial return, but I'm expecting an eternal return. And so looking at the sustainability of that organization, their clear commitment to measures and knowing what really does matter and how they're going about that, and the effective stewardship of it. All those things are really important. I also encourage the trap that can happen when you get into giving, and Jeff and Josh, I know you've seen this happen. You can actually create dependency in your giving. You can actually artificially create something where you are the patron saint holding up a ministry and actually create jeopardy. I see that happen all the time. Someone walks in and gives a giant check recklessly, and it actually ruins a ministry because they weren't prepared to receive that. There wasn't the development plan to replace your money when you stop writing those checks and all that kind of stuff. So I'd say think through with your spouse, if you're doing personal, with your team. Hey, what are the areas we're going to give passionately to, and over time? Alan Barnhart set up actually a whole committee. He actually saved himself the headache of saying yes and no and saying, hey, you know what? We've got criteria, we've got a process, and we've got a committee that reviews and evaluates whether or not this is something we're going to give to, and then how much we're going to give to, and how long we give to it. And so process can protect you and can help ensure better long-term impact. And then making sure you're figuring out what is that kingdom ROI widget or metric that helps you evaluate this is a smart kingdom investment or a poor one.
I've definitely experienced and watched when your passion and your generosity align and they get on the same page, both of them increase. Your passion increases and your generosity increases, and not just your dollar sign generosity, your treasure generosity, but time and talent. Like it is, when scripture tells us that God loves a cheerful giver. Man, it is so easy to be a cheerful giver when your passion and your giving come in line with one another. Jeff, you talk a lot about this difference, and a lot of giving happens in sort of a legacy kind of standpoint where people want to leave a legacy. And we talk all the time about don't leave a legacy, live a legacy. But in planning that out, you have this language you use of there's sort of the world's estate planning kind of thing, and then there's the kingdom estate planning kind of thing. Will you just sort of briefly walk through that? And then we have some questions that are starting to come in, and I want to make sure we have some time to get to a couple of those. So, Jeff.
Yeah. So this is one of the reasons we wanted to do this call. And Mike, thanks again for doing it, and Josh for hosting it. Is we just think our industry does a fairly terrible job helping people with this issue. And so I would just say with estate planning in general, we feel like there are too many templates and not enough deep conversation happening. And it's not really the fault necessarily. It's hard to blame any one person necessarily or any one organization. The estate planning attorneys kind of have their templates that they use. It tends to be a bit of a transaction. They tend to give you a questionnaire that you answer. And so, it's really not their job, or people don't really want to pay by the hour to have these deep conversations about these topics. And even if they did, you kind of need a like-minded team to process it properly, I would say. So, what we find generally, each spouse these days can give away close to $12 million each during their life or at death. Without any estate planning taxes. But if your estate's over 23, 24 million bucks, the estate tax gets up to the 45% pretty quickly. So, you could have a situation if somebody, like Mike was talking about, somebody selling a company for $150 million, we'll sometimes use a $100 million example. And I know not everybody has this, but these principles still apply. $100 million after they sell their business, let's say 24 can be given to their kids or whatever, should they feel that was necessary. It could be a lower amount, could be bigger, whatever they feel God tells them to do. But let's just say it's 24 million. The remaining 76 million generally gets taxed, because what the template says, what the world template says for estate planning is divide your estate by the number of children you have and create trust for all of those. Okay. And then buy insurance to pay whatever the estate tax is. And we think this is a very one-size-fits-all IRS-driven plan, and it's not a very thoughtful plan. And so one of the questions we always ask people when they come in is, what happens if God takes you home? Can you draw it on a napkin where things go? You don't need to know all the alphabet soup or all the rates of taxation or all that, but generally where it goes. And almost everybody set these things up when their kids were really little and divided by the number of kids, and they have the little trust, and off we go. And so, but as things grow and get more sophisticated, back to the same question, ask the owner, if God owns a business, how might he want you to distribute the assets. And again, there's almost always, as we started this conversation, generosity in it. So it comes back to, I think, really the theme that's emerging from this webinar is think hard about, ask the owner what to do, and start to have a strategic plan for your giving. So we just noticed that most people do not have a strategic plan. So it starts with how much is enough for you, how much is enough for the kids, and what do you do with the excess? So let's assume that you go through, you answer those questions, and there is excess, and we alluded to this earlier, that you're going to give away when you're dead. That is a very tax inefficient thing to do. It's good to give money out of your estate because you're not going to pay tax on it in estate taxes. That's nice. You avoid estate taxes, but it's even more tax efficient and more fun and more impact on your family and the kingdom, we think, if it's done while you're living. One of my mentors says, give it while you're living, so you're knowing where it's going, okay, at a minimum. But we think there are bigger tax benefits. Giving it along the way can reduce your current income tax bill, and have this strategic plan where you involve your family. So we generally ask, if something happens to you, how much in estate taxes would you pay? People almost always say zero. Almost always say zero, even if they have a $100 million estate. And in that situation, they're probably going to pay somewhere $35 million of estate taxes. They probably just have an insurance policy that they're spending $500,000 on a year to pay that $36 million bill. But they haven't even really thought about, do I want to give all that to my kids? So it really just starts with these questions that people aren't asking themselves. And I really blame our industry for not doing a good job of asking these questions and spending the time on the front end to develop this plan. So anyway, that's kind of our thing. The world plan is number of kids, is, total net worth divided by number of kids. The kingdom plan is ask God, and there's probably a generosity piece, and there's probably a generosity piece, not just when you're dead, but today. So you use your balance sheet for giving today, not just when you're dead.
All right. We're going to slip over to some Q&A kind of time. So again, if you have questions, feel free to drop those there in the chat bar. And we've got a couple of questions. One of them that's very relevant to this year and where we're at now that I figured would come up, and it did. And that is, heard about the CARES Act, and I heard there's some provisions and some things in there that impact generosity. What's that all about, and what do I do about it? So throw that out there to you.
I'll take a shot in the technical realm. So there's some technical rules depending on what CPA you ask. In a non-CARES Act year, non-2020, 2019, probably 2021, you can deduct 50 or 60%, let's say 60% of your adjusted gross income for a charitable deduction, okay? 30%, basically half of that 60, okay, can be appreciated stock, illiquid things, okay? So if you give, appreciated S&P 500 ETF shares, right? You could use that as 30%. So simplistically, if you make $100,000, you could deduct 30 grand worth of that stuff. And then you can deduct another, let's call it 30% of cash gifts. Well, in the CARES Act, due to COVID and all those things, it's now 100% of AGI. So this has been really interesting, and we're literally having probably the busiest month we've ever had as a company because of the CARES Act. People are actually pumping up their income so that they can give more. So what ends up happening is we have people who are, again, we were talking about balance sheet giving, right? They're using their balance sheet. They can't, one of these, and I call it God math. One of the God math things that happens is we rarely could ever see people outgive God. So it's like the more generous they become, you were talking about, the term we use, Mike, is we're trying to be pipelines, not storage tanks, because we're based in Houston, right? So we got to go with the oil and gas reference. But what we see is people, God starts using them as pipelines. He starts running more resources through them. So we're trying to keep up in a lot of these cases with a net worth that continues to grow, and we can only deduct 50 or 60%. Sometimes we can't give enough of it away. to get it down to a tolerable number. So it's actually a place where for people who want to be generous and use that balance sheet, this is an opportunity to do it against regular income. So you can deduct 100% of your income. Now it's still 30% for the illiquid stuff, but the cash can be given up to 100% for the other 70%, if you will.
So that's the individual. What about the corporate side?
It generally flows through. This is, it all kind of goes through the same way. But we can talk
mutual
about
friend would say,
yeah,
the government basically has a matching grant program. If you think about it, they're actually incentivizing that. Hey, our country's kind of built around the idea that as Americans, we would choose to show the love of Christ. We would give generously, and rather than the government be responsible for all social services, we would be. And in this case, the government's saying, hey, one of the best ways to liquidate the right resources to the right things is to let you and I choose them, and then say we'll do a matching grant. So how cool is it that the government's saying, hey, if you give, we'll match you up to a percentage by reducing taxes. I mean, it's very rare in human history to have a secular government doing a matching grant with Christians to advance the gospel.
Well said.
All right. One of the other questions is if someone wants to take advantage of some of these different tools, when should they start the process in order to get it done?
Yesterday was a good day, right?
I
just ask the questions that get teed up. So,
yeah, one of the things we always talk about is, okay, so let's take a more complicated example where you're selling a private company and you want to be generous. Normally, we already talked about it. 80% of the money is given with cash, right? Although 90% of people's net worth is not in cash. So a lot of times we'll run into people that sold companies and then are giving money away afterwards. Maybe they'll tithe on it afterwards. Very inefficient. Better to give an interest before you sell the company or the piece of real estate or whatever it is to, again, avoid the capital gain on that portion you're giving. So you get that double deduction again. The IRS, our country is, we have an amazing code, as Mike just pointed out, but very few people are leveraging it. So that's kind of part of what we want to get out there in today's call is there are other ways to leverage it. So you got to do it before you sign. If you own the business and you're selling it or the piece of real estate, you got to give it away before you sign that final sales agreement. So you can have a letter of intent, but you cannot start too early, as Mike alluded to. You need really a team. You need your own legal representation. We generally help shepherd that process, a donor advised fund on the other side. You really need a team to do that. So the earlier, the better.
The cool thing is you can get started and do some pretty strategic things really quickly. You can have a donor advised fund set up in days, and you can begin piling up, you can put cash there, you can put stock, you can begin that process really, really quickly. And then depending upon the complexity of deal and valuation, all that kind of stuff, you may find yourself going, oh, I wish I had done this sooner. We missed some windows of things we could have done previously, but let's eyes forward. I think the cool part is the sooner you engage the right team, the more you get to step back and look at a higher altitude at the overall giving situation. So a friend of mine's selling his company, looked at, hey, how do I quickly get a DAF in place to look at the portion of that I'd want to give? And I said, well, question, not just what do you want to give of that, what's your total plan in giving? What do you mean? I said, well, what if you were to tithe out of this? What if you were to give to Christian colleges and this ministry you've been supporting and that youth camp you've been involved in for 20 years? What's your total giving plan of the next few years? And what if you actually backed into that number and gave that part of the business away, and you actually were able to give more than you ever had before? Max, looking at your total liquidity play and your total giving strategy. I was like, well, I'd have to sit down and talk to my wife. I'm like, right. So back to the early questions, the questions we need to ask that are not complicated. This require thoughtfulness and prayerfulness to go, God, it's all yours. What if the question is not what's the most strategic way to give 10%, but what if the way we steward 100% could create impact and outcomes we never would have thought about before? So the sooner you start, the more options you'll have and the more windows you'll have to look at scenarios and run some models and come back and go, what's our 5-year plan? What's our 10-year plan on this? Not just our December 31st. And one of the things I love about things like DAFs and the tools you guys would connect people to is get yourself off of the clock of meeting the IRS's deadline, start playing your overall plan. And I would also challenge you. So Jeff, the CARES Act gave this temporary waterline lifting of tax deductibility of giving. But again, who said our giving should be determined by what the IRS will match you in? So if the IRS stopped matching, would you stop giving? And the real question here is if we are stewarding, it's just cool that the government matches us and gives a percentage match program. But that's if they said next year you can only give 25%, they're not saying what you can give, they're saying what they will match you at. So I don't think we should ever let the government's grant program determine our level of generosity. We should certainly maximize it, leverage it, but not let it determine our giving.
Well said. And the picture I had is, because we're talking about business owners today, mostly is every business owner would say, hey, we have a 401k or whatever retirement plan. And if you got a 2 or 3 or even more generous match in there, everybody knows you should take advantage of the match. But I kind of like the language of matching program for the IRS. Nobody thinks of it that way. They don't even know the matching program really hardly exists, and they're certainly, most people are certainly not taking full advantage of it. And the other thing I like that you brought up, Mike, I think it's an important point for everybody listening and watching is, when you do these bigger transactions, or if you're having a big year or you're selling a company or a piece of real estate, something sort of extraordinary that you don't do every year, it goes in this donor advised fund and you get the deduction this year, but then you have time to give it away, maybe multiple years if you want, or whatever God tells you to do, but you get that one receipt for that deduction. I think people need to know that. And it avoids we call it the pray and spray at the end of the year. Mike, so a lot of people are like, oh, how much do we want to give away this year? And they start writing checks to all these individual ministries instead of just putting it in a donor advised fund, getting the deduction, and then having more space to plan and pray about what to do.
There's also one last little thing. The most generous guy who mentored me in this area of philanthropy years ago, he set up a family foundation where he did what he called clandestine giving. And that is, most of his giving he gave without any connection to his name, so that his relationships wouldn't be defined by his wealth. In fact, he wasn't even known for being super generous until he died. He had given millions away, but he hadn't done it where people went, "You're so great, John." It was only when he died they went, "Oh, that's where all the stuff's been coming from."
Yeah.
And so he created this whole scheme around where you can actually shield your giving to where it's truly anonymous giving, and yet your family gets participated. So there's just, again, whole new levels of games around joining God in the cool gift of giving.
We call it the money ball of giving, right? Remember Moneyball? It's almost like the money ball. I feel like that's what we're talking about is Moneyball, right? It's like the secret code of maximizing your generosity. Sorry, Josh, go ahead.
No, I want to honor people's time. I'm going to squeeze one more question in, if you can answer it real quickly, Jeff. The question was, are you saying that the IRS has no minimum tax in 2020?
Ah, that's a good way to look at it. Yes. Taxes, we always say estate taxes are optional. This year, income taxes are optional. Hadn't thought of it that way, but that's good language.
So if anyone else has other questions, I'm going to show you here in a minute how you can reach out. We have some other questions that we weren't able to get to perhaps. And so if we can help you in any way, I'll show you that. But I want to have you guys have a chance to wrap up. Man, that was a fast hour. I don't know how it was for y'all, but I feel like we could go another hour and keep going into this. Mike, what are some upcoming projects you have? We want to talk about current maybe and some of those things and jogs and other things happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you're intrigued by this conversation Jeff and I've been having around total stewardship and the blend of business and giving and money and life and all that kind of stuff, obviously you can go to c12group.com and check out groups him and I are part of and find those in most cities or metro areas around the country. Jeff's actually going to be speaking on this topic of a gospel paradigm of how you look at planning and legacy at a conference we do every 2 years, which is a gathering of CEOs like Jeff, who are going to present best practices and case studies of what they're doing to live out their faith in business. And that's called Current. You can go to c12current.com. It's in May in Orlando. Leaders from around the world will gather there. And so those places, back to Jeff's point, stories, that can be a great place to see living case studies and go, that would work in my life, or makes me want to go back and reevaluate things. You can go to generousgiving.org and find where they've got retreats virtual ones, in-person ones. They've got a conference in Colorado in April where it's predominantly people coming and sharing their stories of how they're doing this generosity and stewardship journey. All those things are great places to jump in.
And Jeff, you are speaking at Current, and we're excited about that. But you have anything else that's going on? And if anyone wants to get a copy of the book you wrote a year ago on trading up, moving from success to significance, just reach out here at the end. I'll show you how to do that. We'll get that to you. But anything that you want to add there?
Well, I'll put in a plug for Josh. He just got officially recognized as a jog facilitator. I'm going to start using Mike's line of no running required. So we're going to try to start doing those for folks who are interested. Really, that's just the first inspiration part, stories and Bible study around that topic, just that to see how God might speak to you around that. And then obviously, if you need help building these kind of plans, that's what we do for a living at Archetype. So Josh, I think you'll give them our email addresses. And so if you're interested in signing up for C12, becoming a member, or going to Current, please contact Mike. That organization has been a huge blessing to me personally and our organization. And so really engaging there would be fantastic. And obviously, if you want to have a deeper conversation with a wealth management group, contacting Josh or myself, we'd be happy to plug you into the right folks at Archetype. But thank you for everyone tuning in.
Well, everyone, so thankful you tuned into this. It is a truly great season, not only because of the time of the year it is, but in just the world we've lived in, what 2020 has been all about, to reprioritize and really look at generosity and how to do it strategically. Mike, thanks for joining us. Jeff, thanks for joining us. I'm going to throw my email up here in just a minute. If you have questions on either organization, feel free to reach out to me. I will definitely get you to the right person. And just got the question that popped up. Yes, we have recorded the webinar. You will be getting a link to that here in the next little bit. And so we will make sure to get that for you as well. So I'm going to share my email, and guys, I'll let you guys drop off. I'll leave this up for a few minutes, and everybody, hope you have an incredible day and an incredible week. God bless.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.